This is a very short document that looks at what we've been doing on the tower at East Quay. And initially, one of the first concept sketches that we did showed a very elegant, spindly, lightweight structure, which in a way picks up on the tradition of the other structures that exist up and down this bit of coast in Somerset. This is Clevedon Pier, it's a Grade 1 listed building, and beautiful, delicate structure with some stuff on it that you can occupy. And in a way, this is an equivalent version of that, and it's just vertical. So it seems big and bold, but actually there's a tradition of this stuff in Somerset, which is kind of really curious. And the first move that we made was to really work out how this could be publicly beneficial. What I mean by that is that how people could use this to get up to a point, to have a perspective on this part of the Quantox, this part of the country, and really see the sea, see the marina, see the town, see the hills, and see back towards other parts of the country to kind of really get a perspective. And so what this shows is some things that you can get into that are, at the moment, they're pods, we're calling them accommodation pods, but they're really very low-key holiday accommodation for people that want to come here on holiday, and also maybe people who are using the foundry and other bits of the site. They can stay and they're doing residencies or working or something. But it's moved on in terms of design since those very early sketches. We got to a point towards the end of last year where we realised that this thing has a scale that's about 25 metres, and it probably has 5 or 6 pods that you can stay in, nothing on the ground floor, has something at the top you can climb up to, and then a series of really sort of sculptural ramps that you can climb up and get to the top, but also then another layer of structure that stops you falling out. And really these are two versions of the same thing. And then we really started to look at it in terms of buildability. What does it mean to make this thing out of a technology that's available to people locally, that's affordable? And also, how can we build it in such a way that if we wanted, really low-skilled people could join in and use this as a vehicle to acquire new skills? And I've spent about 20 years working with timber, so instinctively my feel is that this could and should be a timber building here. And timber to some people in this context is kind of maybe scary because timber has a reputation of kind of perishing, but actually all these piers up and down this bit of the coast are structurally, they're made out of timber with steel bracing, and that's what this could be. And as we started to draw it, I think we thought that probably it's too kind of blobby as this almost gherkin-like shape. So what we started at Christmas time was to really go right back and look at what does it mean to make a structure like this if you approach it from a buildability point of view. And really we ended up with a very simple post and beam structure within which then you slide these pods that are non-structural, and they're very kind of lightweight things that these are kind of concept image of, that really then you animate it, kind of bring it to life. So we then made a concept model that looked at how you build something like that, and there's four pieces of timber that go right the way down through the building, pods that slide in, beams that slide through, and then it's wrapped in a very delicate, lightweight structure that binds it all together. But what this model critically showed us was a strategy that allows each pod to have absolute privacy in 3 directions. So there's one side of each pod will have people walking past it, and that will be more or less transparent than the others. But that was a really useful sort of 3-dimensional diagram for us to do. And this then shows what it means to take 4 posts, then beams, then find a strategy for circulation, then take artists or the pods that could be collaboration with artists locally that then slide into this structure, and then how that then results in a 3-dimensional form. And what we were thinking when we were doing this was the pods could be expressive of the lias stone that exists here, and it could be that for example, and of course this needs thinking about in some detail as part of a workshop or a series of workshops or a series of collaborations, is that they could, for example, take on the colours. You take the colour, the extreme difference in colour from through that cliff, for example. They could maybe start to allude or start to speak of this type of geological makeup that exists really here in a very kind of particular dimension. So this is then showing, materially, if you look at the whole tower, it's a very simple post and beam structure with some very delicate steel cables that could brace it, tension it, bind it together. and then a series of very different cladding systems for the pods that will allow varying degrees of transparency or translucency depending on whether we want views or privacy. And the pods aren't like this, but what they are like this in terms of their concept, I suppose, is something that's very, very simple. These are very simple little things that are suspended delicately in a kind of much taller structure that allow you to have some perspective on where you are. They're not really bijou holiday apartments. They're things, the pods themselves are about this kind of scale. You know, they have some private space, they have some space outside, and they have a fantastic view. And then some, you know, very, very simple bits. You know, maybe there are kind of a few outside showers, but they're not highly serviced. They're not highly serviced things that are very expensive and complex to construct and maintain. I remember when I first came here, the first thing I did was go down to the beach and pick up this stone. And in a way, it's really good for me to come back and see this again, because this reminds me that structurally, this is what the tower is. It's something that's solid, that's wrapped in something that's lightweight. You know, it's also really good to think about what happens if you look a little bit wider and look at the history of things like rope making in this part of the world, and how, you know, we really could start to pick up on, you know, the history of rope making in the outside of this tower and use some, you know, probably steel rope, but something that really alludes and picks up on this history. We could use that in the sort of secondary structure of the building. So what there is here is still a concept image, but what it shows is a kind of very simple structure that is timber, lighter weight steel binding, and then in the middle of that, what there is a series of pods that have varying degrees of transparency depending on which way they look, depending on where people are walking past them and so on. And you know, what the outer structure is really kind of filigree-like veil that, you know, stops you falling out, but gives you a sense of foreground when you're looking out over a kind of panorama. These, in a way, don't have context, but what they do show you is something that is a morning view. If you're standing, you know, in the marina and looking up at it, they give you a kind of morning view, and the same material, this is the same model rendered in the evening, shows how the cladding of these pods needs to change and shimmer and reflect all the different kind of lights that exist here in this landscape. To give it context, you know, it's something that as you get closer to it is a little bit like this. And in a way, in the context of this, it looks entirely at home. You know, it has all these sorts of colours. It has the technologies of simple things that are braced with much lighter weight things. And for me, you know, it's something that looks very at home here, particularly, you know, you see the scale of the crane and everything else next to it. And in the context of a much wider bit of, you know, or bigger view, you know, it sinks really quite significantly below the top of this hill and doesn't dominate this in any sense. So that's really where it is, and I feel really excited by it, and I can't wait to build this. And I think I feel more excited about it now because I know how we could build it, and it really makes sense for me.